Yeah. Yeah. I would love to see that. I would love to show and I can show Dennis what he Which one? All right. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome and thank you for joining us here at the National Civil Rights Museum. Today, we have a very, very special program honoring a living legend, and the torch is passed on from that legend, David Dennis Sr. and his son, David Dennis Jr. And we're here acknowledging 60 years from the Mississippi Freedom Summer Project and the passage of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. 2 years ago, David Dennis Jr. published The Movement Made Us, a father, a son, and a legacy of a freedom ride. Let's give you some background information on both of these distinguished gentlemen. David Dennis Sr.'s civil rights activism began as a college student leading in the sit-ins in Louisiana. He was a freedom rider of 1961 and served as a co-director of the Council of Federated Organizations and the Congress of Racial Equality's Mississippi Freedom Summer Project to help Mississippians register to vote. After receiving a law degree, he opened a firm and later worked with the legendary and late Bob Moses as the director of the Southern Initiative of Algebra Project to provide quality education as the key to civil rights today. His son, David Dennis Jr., has been a leading critic of race and culture-related news, earning him a journalism award and the Roots 100 Most Influential African Americans in the year 2020. Dennis Jr. wrote The Movement Made Us, chronicling his father's experience in the civil rights movement and the trauma that followed. He's a Morehouse professor and a contributor to ESPN's Undefeated, The Washington Post, and The Atlantic. Like myself, with all you sports fans out there, you can catch him on weekdays on ESPN's Around the Horn. Please join me and give a warm welcome to David Dennis Sr. and Jr. So, as we customary when we do this, it was interesting today to find out that this was one of the first times that you all have been back to Memphis in a long time. And this morning, I had the opportunity to learn history from you and to get your sentiments. What was it like walking through the National Civil Rights Museum this afternoon?
For me personally, it was tough. I'm looking at a lot of the pictures and reliving a whole lot of the past, and a lot of my friends who are not here anymore. And that was tough. And remembering some of the experiences we went through, and some of them did not just die a natural death, you know. And so it was tough to hear their voices, to see them, and to remember what the movement was all about and the people involved in it. So I think I love what is how it's set up. I enjoyed the experience, but on a personal level, it was tough.
You know, it was funny. We were here at the opening. I was like a baby when it opened, and so there was these memories of these people who I grew up with. We saw on the wall, sort of similar to Dad and these friends that he's known forever. And there's people who were here that raised me. You know, my family, my extended family. There's pictures of Bob Moses, pictures of Hollis Watkins, people like that, and also people who I interviewed for the book, who were not, you know, didn't see the book get published. You know, and it's just a reminder of, you know, the people who paved the way for us, the people who are sometimes forgotten to history. Because there's also, when I see the people whose pictures are on the wall, I see people whose pictures are not on the walls. And obviously there's just no building in the world that can encapsulate everybody who is part of the movement. And so you think about who's not there and whose stories are always going to be, you know, in between the crevices of how we tell these stories, right? And I take solace in the thought that the people who are there are carrying those legacies also, right? And I think that's one of the things we wrote about in the book, was just to make sure that the people who are not going to be in the museums, that their stories are told, that the C.O. Chins of the world are part of the canon of civil rights history. And so all of that was sort of spinning in my mind as we were walking through. And also just on a personal level, it was just a reminder of, you know, when you write a book, you want to be as accurate as possible. And so when I see things and I'm like, oh yeah, that's what we said happened in the book, kind of made me feel good about what, you know, the accuracy of the stories we were telling.
Absolutely. So, Mr. Dennis Sr., 1959, 1960, you're a college student living in Louisiana. Talk a little bit about how you got involved in the American Civil Rights Movement and some of your reflections as a young man going into the decade of the 1960s that will ultimately change the course of American history.
Well, my first involvement, I can either say it's by accident or it's by fate or whatever. And give you an example. I'm talking about, I was born and raised, born on a plantation in northern Louisiana. And when I say on a plantation, no inside toilets, inside toilets, anything like that, any lights, until I was 9 years old after. So we moved to Shreveport. So my whole thing was how to not to have to go back on the plantation in census, you know, not understanding the time wasn't so bad living after all. But at the same time is that, so I got lucky enough to get a scholarship to go to an HBCU. Had not been for that, I never gotten a college education had not been for an HBCU. And so then it was by getting into the movement, when I say fate is because I graduated from high school, my classmate was a guy by the name of Hubert Brown. We just wanted to play basketball and stuff like that. So there was movement stuff going on at Southern University and all this communities in Baton Rouge and other. We didn't get involved. I didn't get involved. I just wanted to do that. And went to Dillard, same thing. I talk about fate, things that are hitting me that I didn't know about is because Hubert Brown later on became known better to people in the audience as H. Rap Brown. and so that was our interest at that time. So you never know what God's got in store for you. So I go to Dillard University, and the same thing is going. There's students who were in jail. Rudy Lombard were at and a lot of them, Cesar Carter people from the various universities in New Orleans. And I didn't want to get involved with it because I just wanted to go and graduate and get a degree in engineering and take care of my family so I'd never have to go back on the plantation. One day I was walking across the campus, and so there was a rally going on, and there was this lady who was dynamic and talking about, and I passed by and I said, oops, go back. So after meeting, I wanted to talk to her, not to find out more about the civil rights movement, but just to find out more about her because she was beautiful. So I was really trying to get a date, right? The date she talked me into was going to a civil rights meeting in New Orleans, and it was a core meeting, and that's when I was introduced to the civil rights movement. And so for a while there, for weeks and weeks, I was trying to get a date, and she kept bringing me back to the doggone meeting, And so finally, she talked me into the fact, I said, well, they were doing some demonstrations, and I decided to go to part of it because they weren't going to jail. So I said, well, it's safe. I can do that. Maybe that'd impress her. She'd go out and date them. So I go on this demonstration, thinking they're going to do the same thing they've been doing the rest of them, letting them go. Lo and behold, they don't. They put us all in jail. And so here I am now in jail. My mama don't know anything about it, so I'm in jail. There's no money to bond us out, so I'm there for a whole week. So so that led to pieces. After that, there was, in the meantime, excuse me, the freedom rides were going on. That started by CORE, and the CORE chapter in New Orleans was supposed to be the host. The freedom rides started in D.C. and Pleasant. So at any rate is, as soon as I got out of this piece is, I'm out of jail. Okay, my mom still don't know about it. And so then all of a sudden is they have the buses are burned and stuff like this is, and the people who were injured in Birmingham and Anderson, Alabama on bus rides, they couldn't get medical care. So in New Orleans, there was a group of Black doctors we knew, and but they were associated with a hospital called Flint Goodrich because they couldn't practice in a general hospital. So this is a Black hospital called Flint Goodrich that was connected again to an HBCU, Dillard University. So we got doctors, and we got them down from Alabama, the people injured, to be taken care of by these doctors. Now, in the meantime, you got this thing going on about whether the rides should continue. You got this dynamic Black woman out of Nashville, Tennessee, Diane Nash, who is moving, is talking to me. We got to continue, and John Lewis and others. Then there's this other group that you don't hear anything about is this core group out of New Orleans, and Oretha Castle is pushing, who is the leader, who is a civil rights icon, who, by the way, I found out was the sister of Doris Castle, the young lady that I'm still chasing, right? And so they decide they want to continue the movement, blah, 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 call a meeting. I go to the meeting with no intention of getting involved. And Doris embarrasses me by talking about, if you're going to be a man, you want to date me, blah, blah, blah. Okay, here I go. So I go to there was a meeting in Montgomery, Alabama. And so that was on the day after you might have heard about when the church was surrounded by the mob and everything else and the Dr. King and then we're in the church and blah. And so there was a meeting. The next day we arrived on the train to that meeting. It's 5 of us from New Orleans. So in this meeting, it was Dr. Harris's house in Montgomery, Alabama. I'll never forget that meeting. It was all of the icons that I've read about, Dr. King, Ralph Abernathy, Walker, Abernathy, Bevel, you name them. They were in this particular meeting trying to make that decision. I'm there also, but I'm now figuring out I'm not supposed to be here. I'm gonna be put in jail, again, and I'll die. How do I get out of here, get home? And so, believe it or not, they're going back and forth, back and forth. And the elders were trying to get the young people to say no. Young people taking a position, if we say no, not continue this ride, we might as well give up. I mean, they win. We can't let them win. And then people talk about death. And I'm hoping that the elders will win the argument so I can get out of there. So to make a long story shorter, the piece is that during this argument, I'm trying to make this decision. Somebody in this room makes a statement, there's not enough space in this room for both God and fear. Make your choice. Boom. So that did it. And all of a sudden, it was like, I was able to make a distinction between, yes, I'm afraid, but this fear thing that paralyzed you is gone. It was like, wipe it out. And for some reason, my hand is up. I'm on that first bus. And my commitment to the movement was then, and I've never been able to turn back, even when I try. And that's how I got involved with the movement per se is. And by the way, so you know, I never got a date with Doris.
And you all touch on Doris a lot in this book. David Jr., when did you decide that you wanted to tell the story of your father and his contributions, his activism in this role? When your dad is talking about sitting in the rooms of the likes of Dr. King, Reverend Shuttlesworth, seeing that Medgar Evers just hours before he was assassinated 61 years ago, what was the process of interviewing your father and to pull out those traumatic but empowering stories?
So the first part of that is I wanted to write this. I feel like I kind of always wanted to write the stories. I sort of grew up sitting around the dinner table, and Dad and his friends were telling all of these incredible stories, riveting stories. And as a kid, you know, yes, there was the history of it that was appealing to me, but also when you're 6 or 7 years old, like I think people don't understand. Like I'm hearing stories of car chases, and you know, like these schemes and these heists and these things they're doing to try to get free. Like, I mean, there's just riveting stories, right? And they're always being told in these cinematic ways, right? And so I always wanted to write this story, and I think it sort of came to a head where this needed to be done now, right around 2016. When there were some specific political things that happened in this country around that time. And I think what I wanted to do at that point was to make something that felt hopeful, right? I wanted to make something that felt like hope in a time where we did not feel particularly hopeful, and to remind folks that in this country that the most powerful country in the world, right, tried to withhold democracy from a group of folks who did not have the means that the rest of the country has, right? So we have sharecroppers, we have folks out in the streets, we have preachers, we have everybody, Black folks who are just trying to get free and win a war and install a democracy in a country that does not want democracy to be here, right? And I think that at the time when you have all of these oppressive forces weighing down on us that feel like it's too much to bear, I think something that reminds us that regular folks change this country was important to do, and using Dad's story and the people around him was vastly important to do that. Now, in terms of the interviews and getting the stories out of Dad, I would say a major contribution to that was me providing him with Crown Royal every so often to try to and then hit record while I'm asking questions. That was a big part of the process. But other than that, I think it was really just having sort of an understanding of the stories as they were, and then asking him. I mean, it's a dad and a son, so ask them stories in a way that felt familial, felt with love, and to push a little bit. I was pushing them to tell things and to dig into places that were, were painful, that had been locked away. I mean, as you saw this earlier this morning, we were in the museum, and there's a picture of Dad inside at the Democratic National Convention that until he saw it an hour ago, did not remember being in there. So there are things that are locked away and that we had to excavate together. And it wasn't always easy. There were moments where, you know, especially in 2020 when George Floyd was happening and we're feeling so much despair, there were times when it was really difficult to get those stories out and to dig. But it was a process. It was a process, and I think we got to a place where we could talk freely about the history.
60 years ago, the state of Mississippi was a hotbed for racial injustice and racial oppression. Less than 3% of the Black population in the state was registered to vote. And earlier that year, one of your friends, the late Bob Moses, the likes of Amzie Moore, Aaron Henry, and yourself decided that unless, and the likes of Vernon Damer, who also played a major role in that, decided that if you don't have the ballot, you don't count. If you are unable to exercise your civic duty as a citizen, what the 15th and 19th Amendment says, then you don't count. And so the attempt was to bring white and black college students from the North into the South to help register Black voters. And there were some trials and some significant tribulations, specifically when two of the men that you knew, Mickey Schwerner and James Chaney, were killed by the Ku Klux Klan this 60 years ago this month. We're gonna roll a film when James Chaney's body was found alongside his two friends. And 3 days later, you were asked to give the eulogy. And we're gonna, for our audience out there, we're gonna watch this film. It's about 2 minutes. And then I wanna hear what were you thinking before and then what happened after it. So let's roll this film for our audience.
I feel that he's gotten his freedom, and we're still fighting for it. But what I want to talk about right now, it's the living dead that we have right among our midst, not only in the state of Mississippi, but throughout the nation. Those are the people who don't care, those who do care but don't have the guts enough to stand up for it. And those people who busy up in Washington and other places using my freedom and my life to play politics with. That includes the president on down to the governor of the state of Mississippi, you see. In my opinion, as I stand here, I not only blame the people who pulled the trigger, or did the beating, or dug the hole with the shovel. I bury the people, not bury, sorry. But I blame the people in Washington, D.C., and on down in the state of Mississippi for what happened just as much as I blame those who pulled the trigger. You see, I know what's going to happen. I feel it deep in my heart when they find the people who killed those guys in Neshoba County. You got to come back to the state of Mississippi and have a jury, all their cousins, their aunts, their uncles. And I know what they're going to say, not guilty, because no one saw them pull the trigger. I'm tired of that. See, and another thing that makes me even tired though, that is the fact that we as people here in the state, in the country, are allowing this to continue to happen. Even us as Black folk. So I look at the young kids here, that's something else that I grieve about. The little Ben Chaney here, and the other ones like him around in this audience. When he wants someone to babysit for him, he gets my Black mama to hold that baby. See, as long as he can do that, he can sit down beside me, he can watch me go out there and register to vote, he can watch me take some type of public office in his state, and he can sit down as I rule over him just as he's ruled over me for years, you see. This is our country too. We didn't ask to come here and they brought us over here.
I remember as a 10-year-old watching Nas on the Prize on VHS, and that clip popped up. And that was an impressionable moment for me, even at that age, not fully knowing the story and the history behind it. Mr. Dennis Sr., when you were approached to eulogize your friend, what was the mood and the setting behind that? And then just kind of take us back to, if you can recall,
Yeah. Before I do that, there is a spirit of the movement in this room. So there are two other gentlemen here whom I just want to briefly recognize because they are part of this. And they need to, I want them to be part of my sharing my experience. Doug Smith, sitting back here. Doug was a youngster. You saw these young kids earlier. He wasn't much older than them at the time. And I was just the other day, not too long ago, looking at a picture of him and his other volunteers and stuff is he's on the back of a tractor, the Damon's place is. And I said to the person I was talking to, I said, I wonder where Doug is. And I was walking into this room here, there was Doug, And then there's another good friend of mine who's here, who's part of this movement too. And a dear friend, and he's close to whatever goes on here. What's going on here is it's Dr. Leslie McLemore sitting up here. And if I missed anybody, please raise your hand. But at any rate is that it was through the book, and that caused me to remember what happened here is that I had been asked to tone things down because the country was really in a uproar at that time and you had riot in Harlem and places of that nature while they were looking for the bodies. And they were all during the time they were looking for bodies for the 3 civil rights workers, they were finding bodies in Mississippi. That part a lot of people don't know about. They were finding bodies in Mississippi. And the country reaction to that was you say, well, they found some bodies. And so people go back and say, oh, were they in it for the 3 civil rights workers? And they come back and say, nope, and say in the news and everybody will say, well, thank God, I hope they're still alive. And the country wasn't realizing the fact is that they were finding bodies. But primarily the bodies they were finding were Black bodies. Of those 3 young people who were missing, only one of them was Black. All right? So the country was in an uproar to find, in my opinion, 2 bodies. That's what we were living with at that time. So all that was going through my head. But more than that is my son, thanks to him, doing his research and stuff. Well, no, Dad, would you do this? What I had buried to the fact is that I had gone to, a little while before that, they find the bodies that go to Atlantic City to try to find housing for the delegates to the Freedom Democratic Party for the challenge. And so after I finished, one of my good friends was David Baldwin, brother James Baldwin. And I called him from there and I said, I was getting ready to go back to Mississippi. He said, man, why don't you come to New York and spend a couple of days and cool out? I said, no, man. He said, come on, man. So he lived around 110th and 5th Avenue. So I took a bus and went there. And we decided to go to a spot in Harlem. And it's called Wells, to get some chicken and waffles. They did chicken and waffles all the way back there in 1964, right? And that's where we were on our way. And all of a sudden we were caught in the middle of the Harlem riots, where I spent 2 whole days with David watching the horror of what I thought could only happen in Mississippi, not in New York City. And one of the things the last day is we were walking down the street, somebody throws a bottle, there's a little kid running across the street, and the cops unloaded on him. Boom, boom, boom. And so David is trying to deal with the kid. Cop walks up to him with a gun on and says, get up, nigga, before I blow your brains out. David says, you just did. And there was a little tension there. A black cop came up and said, leave the man alone, blah, blah, blah. And we left. The ambulance came up. We don't know if the kid lived or not. I don't know. We left and walked in silence to David's house. Next day, I went back to Mississippi. Whatever the reason, until David dug up all this stuff is that I didn't remember, all those details, including the fact is, whenever I tell this about the speech, I always said, I looked out into the crowd and I saw Ben Chaney, and I just lost it. What I actually saw were two kids. One was alive, and I don't know what happened to the other. That's what got me. And I lost it in a sense but I had lost it for a long time. I had buried that. So part of the things that we look at, talk about in the movement are those people we see physically who've been beaten, or people who died as a result of being part of the movement. What we don't realize is that the things that those people went through, not just me, but all the people in the civil rights movement, Leslie, he's going to deny it, Doug and all of us. We didn't know a doggone thing about no PTSD. These people lived it day and night. Myself too, is for like years, not a few days, some of them. So a lot of stuff is buried and everything else is, and a lot of this stuff is in our brain head. That's what makes it difficult to tell the story. That's what makes it difficult to sit in a room and look at, what you pictures of people is, because it brings back a lot of this stuff that we barely try to forget. But that's what's part of what was going through my head is that it took me, my son writing a book and asking me probing questions that all of a sudden all this stuff began to come out is. So that's why part of it made it very difficult. Thanks to Mr. Crown Royal, I was able to make it through.
David Jr., when, seeing that clip, and to me, it's parallel when you hear I Have a Dream, I've been to the mountaintop, a Ballad or the Bullet, Medgar, Wildlife, Mississippi, because it was one of those defining moments in the civil rights movement where people, they took something from that. And in your father's grief and despair after that led to a new sense of urgency in this movement. Just 2 months later, Fannie Lou Hamer is addressing people at the Credentials Committee about the horrors that your father's talking about. When we look 60 years later, and during the process of writing this book, what are some of those similarities in how this movement of then has evolved into social justice movements of today?
I think one of the incredible through lines, a lot of it, one of the incredible through lines I see in movement work from then and now is that like movement work, it requires extreme creativity and ingenuity, but creativity, right, is to look at a society that is one way and imagining it differently, right? And so there are things that we take for granted now, right? And the idea of like, well, let's not have slavery anymore, right? And at the time, that's how society worked, right? Jim Crow law, separate but equal, all these things, and segregation. This is how the world worked. And to conceptualize a world where it's different, right, is something that requires creativity and imagination, right? And what I see now in movement work now is a lot of imagining of a world that could be different than what we have come to accept, right? A world without prisons, a world without police, a world without, voting in the way that it does, a way that actually represents how people want politics to work. And one story that always sticks out to me is in the book, how Dad and the groups in Shreveport disrupted the state fair in Shreveport without means to do much, but just weaponizing white fear against black folks to sort of turn on itself. And, you know, the full story is in the book, no spoilers. But, you know, like it's all of these things you do. You look at a bus boycott, you look at all of this work, it's all creativity, and it's all thinking about the world being a better place and finding out how to do that together. And it's all grassroots, right? And I think that when we talk about movement work now, we talk about things on a national level. We talk about BLM as an organization. We talk about that, but we don't talk about the grassroots that make this stuff happen. And I think that's really where the work is, where it always is, where it's in the book, where it's in societally. It's looking at who is on the ground and doing the stuff, right? And I think those, you know, the imagination, the creativity, and the groundwork are real through lines. And, you know, finally it all sort of comes together in just belief, right? And belief that we will win. We shall overcome. We will win. Like, that is something that you cannot break from any movement, right? You don't have movement folks who say, well, maybe we just won't win, right? And that belief, I think, is the thing that will sustain, no matter if we're talking 60s, if we're talking 2024, we're talking 3,000, whatever year. I think those are the things that will sustain us.
Mr. Dennis Sr., 60 years ago, the United States passes the Civil Rights Act of 1964, effectively outlawing segregation as a public practice in facilities and accommodations. 60 years later, how do you measure the success and the legacy from that bill? And why is it still important and relevant today?
Well, I learned two things from this. Number one is that reflecting on the struggle, the sacrifices that people made to get that bill passed. And then what I reflect upon all the time now is what the people who signed it and who accepted this bill says the necessity to be passed. I mean, understanding why they did it. And number two, how much work and planning they've gone into to make sure that they can undo it. So get us to where we are now, into what we call the surge back. And somebody once might say, how you deal with this whole Make America Great Again, which is a surge back for us, right? So when I look at it, the first part of it is that in terms of what we did, which we talk about here, to make that happen. And then what happened afterwards is there was a promise made. If you look at the news clips and stuff, after the 64 Civil Rights Act was passed, and Lyndon Johnson said it about what's going to happen in the South and others, the Dixiecrats and what we have is. And he understood and predicted that there would be this surge back. And so they start these programs. So one of the things that is understanding the strength of the civil rights movement, what it was based on, it had a lot to do with Black people and what they call the extended family. We dealt with each other's. I came up with out of a single parent home, you know, but I had a lot of fathers, you know, because I grew up, and most of the people I knew at that time, we all grew up as children of the community. We had real communities. There were Black teachers, Black doctors, Black lawyers. We all lived together. We own our own grocery stores. We own the restaurants, you want to call it. Little mom and pop stuff is. The money circulated in the community. I remember growing up is on Sundays, we used to dress up, you know, put on your best to go out to dinner. It wasn't always at a restaurant. Somebody in the neighborhood, all right, will open up their house. And you would go in and the people sit to dinner, strangers, whether it's people from the neighborhood, and share a meal together because there was no place to go. And when we left, my parents know you leave some money in the jar, I don't know how many of y'all might remember that, you know. So now we had that way of circulating with children. I mean, people would say, they call me Sonny. They knew when I did well or not. And if I did something wrong in the neighborhood, Mr. Jack had the right to jack me up. Okay, you know, okay. So the family structure we had was different. But because we didn't have a father in the house all the time, there was a guy who came out with writing a study that says that's one of the causes of the issues that in the Black community was because there was absentee Black fathers. His name was Moynihan. And they came out with a Moynihan report, if you recall, condemning the Black family structure pieces. And then that was the first attack, because they knew the strength that he had in terms of the Black family pieces, structure pieces. It's part of the movement. During the 60s is when we were bringing the kids down, people always ask us about how did y'all get, you know, find housing and stuff for all these kids? We had 1,000 kids. The community opened their arms to them and said, come on, they housed them, fed them, you know, and protected them, right? You know, across the state of Mississippi. Those white kids just disappeared, you know, because they opened up and said, they're like our children. It's part of that. That's what made that successful. So that's the book is trying to indicate it, because the success of the movement just wasn't about a few people. There were hundreds and thousands of people who participated. We just don't know about them. Made it possible. So the next step was that, which I call this is the Trojan horse of the civil rights movement, came the poverty program that people said, wow, that's a great thing. Didn't understand is its intent was, and which it was very effectively, it drained off the Black leadership, brought them across the track, and built the little offices, the poverty program offices, stuff like this across the track, and began to drain off the Black community. Then the economic development attack on that was, the fact is that they, all the little stores began to set up, the Piggly Wigglies and places like that is, what's that thing in New Orleans, in Jackson called?
Jitney Jungle.
That was, they had in the around the Black community, it was a store called Jitney Jungle. The same store in the white community was called Jitney Premier. Right, you know? This whole idea was to drain off the economic pieces, you know. So what we did, the pressure was put on Black people to integrate. So you couldn't talk about Blackness, you had to talk about integration, you know. So what we did, we integrated. White people did not integrate with Black people. So it was a one-way street. We crossed the track. They didn't cross the track. So our businesses and stuff like that began to die out. So then that wasn't enough. We're gonna really hit them. So back in Eisenhower time, they started a program around, you know, how you build highways and those pieces, you know, across the country. Then they took this thing and called it urban renewal, remember? But what they used it for was building these highways and expressways and stuff, right in the big cities and places, right straight through the Black community where the economic development base was existing. And they took it away. So the end result is, it's where we are now, whereby you have places where Black people are existing, but not living. We don't have any more real communities, almost any place in this country right now. So Make America Great Again really started back right after the Civil War. You know, we are where we are now in the political scene. It's had a lot to do with all the way back with Rutherford B. Hayes' compromise. You know, if you look at that part of history pieces. So all of this plays in, and what we've been part of is a game to get us back where we are, is to take back what we won, because the fact is we had to convince there's a world that was looking at us in a war going on. Is you can't talk about democracy. We're putting water hoses on people for trying to register to vote. So the Civil Rights Bill had to be passed. So to make a long story short, this piece it was, which is impossible. You know? So where we are in here is we have to realize this is. So the question is, how do we protect ourselves? How do we deal with it? I mean, education, there's two avenues to freedom in this country has always been for Black people. Education, all right, and citizenship. They went hand in hand, all right? And so that's where the attack is at the present time is. So getting this thing back together, because if you recall, I mean, it took a long time for even white women to get the right to vote. So it's not going to just stop with us. When you talk about Make America Great Again, it goes back, beyond that time also. You had the right to vote. So I just want to put that out there as part of this is a reason why.
Absolutely.
That the connection.
Absolutely. David Jr., you were a prime example of a child learning about this history. What would your message be to the youth today that understand or there seems to be somewhat of a disconnect with this story, the civil rights movement as a whole, that it's sometimes it's ancient, and so what would you convey to a 10 or 11-year-old child today that learns about these grassroots organizing, that learning about these principles of systemic racism that can still plague their communities, and what is it that you would recommend and encourage them to do to get involved, to have their voices heard?
Well, I mean, I would definitely say, let me go step back a second. I think one of the reasons that we are taught what we're taught as kids about the movement is intentional, right? I think what they tell us, and they put it, early. You got Martin Luther King, you got Malcolm X, you got Medgar Evers, right? And what they're saying is, yes, you can be part of this movement, and yes, you can make a change, but we will kill you. We will make sure that you are not going to make it on the other side of this, right? And then the reason they tell us that is because they make you feel as though if you need to be impactful in the movement, you have to martyr yourself, right? You have to do what they call giving your life, right? And not what has actually happened, which is your life being taken away from you. Because throughout this, you have stories of people who, this museum is dedicated to somebody who wanted to go home to his family the next day, right? And what they show you is that you have to give everything that you have and lose everything to be part of this movement, right? And I think what we're trying to convey here is that movement work, every single person who, if you are Black in this country, you're part of movement work, right? Unless, there are some exceptions, so, Supreme Court justices notwithstanding. But there are, what I would encourage kids to do is to talk to an elder, right? Because if you have an elder in your family at any point, they have done something to get Black folks free in this country, right? I was empowered by hearing stories of people who are close to me who, had jobs, were living, regular 9-to-5s by the time I met them, were doing what they could, raising kids, but they did something impactful in this country. You have an uncle, you have an aunt, you have somebody, I guarantee they were the first Black plumber in their city. They were part of some workers union who did something. They did something to get Black folks free. And that knowledge is empowering, right? So I would definitely encourage a kid to go out and ask any elder, ask them about their life, ask them what they did, ask them what their life was like. And I guarantee you will find that you come from a lineage of Black people who got Black people free, right? And what you will learn from that is you will learn that you did something, that you can do something, right? Like when we think about those families who took in all the folks from Freedom Summer, right? And it may seem like nothing, we will never hear their names, but they put their lives at great risk, right? To just serve a plate of fried chicken on a Tuesday night for somebody who was trying to get folks registered to vote. Because they had to go to work the next day, right? And they had to face people who wanted them dead for doing just that, right? And I think that, and they just went about their day after that. And I think what kids can learn is that if I just, try something, right? I don't have to be the next Martin Luther King, right? I don't have to be the next Fannie Lou Hamer, right? But I can be somebody who does something to impact this country and to get us free. And I think that sort of baby step in helping them understand that, most importantly, understanding where they come from, I think is a critical step that gets lost in the process.
Ladies and gentlemen, David Dennis Sr., David Dennis Jr., the book is The Movement Made Us. Yes.
Can I say one thing?
Absolutely. Yeah, ad-lib.
Yeah, I just want to add a little bit to what my son's saying. I had an experience I need to share. The first of the year, I got a phone call. And the call was from someone who says to me, "Are you Dave Dennis? Used to be in the civil rights movement?" And I didn't understand why he said used to. I said, yeah. And he said, "I think I'm your cousin." So he goes on to explain to me that it seems as if his uncle was my father. I only saw my father twice in my life. I never knew where he was from. And the first time I saw him was when I got involved in the civil rights movement. He read about it, got in contact with my mom, said, "I want to see my son." Mom contacts me, and I said, "What the hell you want to see me about? You haven't seen me all these years. I'm not 21 years old." My mom told me something, that taught me something about that. She says, "Yeah, but as long as you live, he'll always be your father. So get off your butt, you go see him and get to know him." And I looked at her straight in the eye, and I said, "Yes, ma'am." That's what I did. So at any rate, on this call, I learned about my father's family, where he was from, and who they are. So this is 24, this is now. So he said we got this when he was a kid growing up. They had an aunt who lived in this place, and they would have their Thanksgiving dinner and Christmas dinner. The family would gather there, and she would say to them, this is in the 60s, that we need to pray. We have family in the civil rights movement needs our prayer. And so they will pray. And so we did that until the 70s when she died. And some of us continue to do that. We pray. We didn't know who we're praying for. So one of his kids said, I don't want to know who the heck this is. So they searched and found out who I was. All right. Now, talk about fate. All those years I worked in the movement, found out my family is from Greenwood, Greenville, Mississippi. Leslie seems like my cousin, all right, happens to be Unita Blackwell. All right. I don't know if you know Mike Dennis, who's a blues singer up there in the Delta. Yeah, he's one of my cousins. I want to say that is because the fact is that I've been knocking on those doors. I must have knocked on some of their doors. Greenwood, Greenville, that's where the movement was based at in the 60s is, and then after that, the God brought me back as the head of the Southern Initiative Algebra Project. And where did we start the program at? Our first sites were Greenwood, Greenville, and places of the Mississippi Delta, Itta Bena, Mississippi Valley State, and where the others. My grandmother used to tell me all the time. She said, "Son, say God brought you here for a purpose. As long as you're serving that purpose, you're all right. So when you stop, he's going to let you go, So you're finding your purpose and doing your best you possibly, do it." So now talk about fate, the beginning about all these connections were being made, about my life that I didn't know, that these connections are there, like Ralph Brown and others, we've come to, that's to go around. The other big piece is to show you how these connections work. Bob Moses used to tell me a story all the time, and we've been friends since 1962. And until he died. And Bob, when he first got involved in the movement, Ella Baker sent him around the South to meet people in the movement so he get to know the South. So he went to places around. So one of the places he went to was Shreveport, Louisiana. So just before Bob died, I asked Bob, I said, Bob, when you went to Shreveport, you keep talking about Shreveport. That's where I'm from, right? So who do you talk to in Shreveport? He said, I don't know. He said, he was some doctor with the NAACP. I said, was he a dentist? Yeah, that's right. I said, was it Dr. C.O. Simpkins? He said, that's him. That was also my mentor and my dentist in Shreveport, Louisiana. So Bob and I crossed paths, not even knowing about it, before I even physically, personally met him. So faith in whether or not God has a space, a place for you, where he's going to be, you know, because you have to answer to him one of these days. You know, you need to think about that. My life says that there was, you know, that purpose there is, and somewhere there's this connection. And all of a sudden is I find that I'm being brought back to Mississippi, back to Mississippi, back to Mississippi. Why? Because part of my lost part of me lived in Mississippi. I need to share that with you.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is the beauty and the impact that oral history and remembering this history has on our future. David Dennis Sr. has devoted his life so ensure the citizenship for folks to count in this country with registering to vote. A lot of his friends are no longer here. The likes of Herbert Lees, the Medgar Evers, the James Cheneys, the Michael Schwerners, the Viola Liuzos, the Jimmy Lee Jacksons, they all devoted and paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we had an opportunity to be recognized as citizens. And so wherever you are, here or abroad watching, please register to vote. That is the number one thing as a citizen that you can do to bring some more positive social change. David Jr., thank you so much for continuing your father's legacy and to continue to prevent the re-narration of this story. There's such a major attack out there today for banning books and to diminish this legacy that your father and so many others have carried on so that we in this museum and elsewhere can live in that social change. The book, The Movement That Made Us.
Yeah, and please support this place, you know, and places like this is because my grandmother's right. You know, as long as this place exists, it might continue my purpose, and my stay on this earth might be a little bit longer. Okay, so
thank you, everyone, for joining us this afternoon. You can always follow us on all of our social media networks and our website, civilrightsmuseum.org. In a few weeks, we will commemorate Juneteenth on June 19, 2024. We will have free admission on that day. Please come out and support us that day. We'll be free admission from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And on July the 27th, we will be holding a community and teacher symposium. And we will also bring some of Mr. Dennis's colleagues to talk about the importance of 60 years later. The Movement That Made Us is on sale. Civil Rights Museum. If you have not purchased your copy, we have copies outside in our gift shop, and Mr. Dennis Sr. and Jr. will be happy to personalize them with you. Thank you again for joining us here at the National Civil Rights Museum.